everyone, welcome back to Feather Stitch House. My name's Rebecca and each week on this channel I upload videos about embroidery and textile art to help you get creative. In our midweek videos we play around with different embroidery and textile techniques, and we're looking at different embroidery stitches, we're looking at patchwork from around the world, and I'm also making some things along the way. So a couple of weeks ago I started a book sleeve project as a gift for a friend's birthday that's happening in a couple of months, and we started with the foundation for the book sleeve. So we used a technique called stack and whack to make a crazy patchwork background and stitched it all down. This week I'm going to start embellishing it. Now this is quite a quick video, it's just a bit of an overview of my starting point and just a few tips and tricks to help get you going. We're going to build our stitch designs around circles, partly because I have a little piece of embroidery that I wanted to incorporate into the book sleeve. So because that's worked in a circle, it lends itself to following that through into the rest of the book sleeve. So today I'm going to work on what will be the front of the sleeve, and I'm going to show you the circular stitch design that I'm going to repeat across at least the front cover, possibly onto the back as well. So gather some threads and your bits and pieces and let's get stitching. So I've decided to go with a voiceover on this one because I wasn't happy with the quality of the sound recording, so I hope that's okay. We're in part 2 of our book sleeve project, and this is the background we created last time. If you remember, we just got an offcut of batting and we used the stack and whack technique to make some crazy patchwork blocks. Now there are some horizontal and vertical lines that are visible, and what we want to do is try and draw the eye away from those with our stitching so that it looks like a more harmonious piece. Now this is my little basket of tricks. This was all part of a vintage thread and embroidery slow stitch pack that I got from a local antique shop, and I want to try and use these things on my background as much as possible. So I've got some lace and some ribbons, we got some braid, I think I got a little, we got this crochet lace trim as well, I got a handkerchief, and we got some threads in there as well. There's this strange piece of decorative trim, not sure how I'm going to use that. I really like the green braid. And then I'd also got this little embroidered piece. This was a free kit that came with Love Embroidery magazine, and I wanted to incorporate that because it seemed to harmonise quite well. So I've just drawn around it, used a jam pot lid to draw around it to get the circle, and I want to incorporate that today as well. Now I've bought myself a book that's going to go inside. This is just a black and red A4 plain notebook. I really like these because the paper is so smooth and there's not a lot of bleed through, and my friend I know likes to use liquid ink pens, rollerball pens, and so this is a really good option because she'll be able to use both sides of the paper without any issue. And I'm going to use this to mark out the different sections of the cover. I think it's really easy to forget when you're making a book sleeve that the cover will actually be stitched on the right hand side of the fabric, and I think because we often work left to right, we want to start on the left, but with a book sleeve we need to start on the right hand side. So I've roughly folded my panel in half. I'm slotting the book inside, and that's going to give me a sense of where the spine is. I just want to even it up. Then once I've located it sort of horizontally, I want to centre it vertically as well. So I'm just making sure that book is pretty central. Then I'm going to flip up all the pages and tuck that overhang underneath the pages at the back. Then I'm going to flip the left hand side over and close the cover, and that's going to basically locate what will be the cover of the book, what will be the spine, what will be the back, and what will be the inners. And I'm just going to mark roughly where those places are. So you can do this with measuring, but what you'll find is that the thickness of your batting and fabric it's really hard to judge how much you need to add. So if you do this with measuring, you're likely to have a book sleeve that actually works out being too small. So this is a much better way to do it, because you've got the natural looping, and the folding around the book takes into account the thickness of the fabric. So I've just gone down where the edge of the front cover is. I've marked where the top of the cover is, and I'm just feeling down with my finger there to find the spine, and just putting some markers there with my heat erase pen all the way down to the bottom, and then I can mark along where the bottom of the cover is. Then I'm going to flip the book over and do the same again. So I'm taking into account the fact that there's thickness to the book, marking where the two tram lines of the spine need to be, and then I'll mark around the back cover as well. Now, if you want to, you could put a big F on what will be the front and a B on what will be the back, so that you don't forget which side of your panel is going to form which part of the book sleeve. But that might be overkill. I think once you've done this, it kind of sets in your mind which part of your panel is going to sit on which part of the book. They're just scooting along the top there, and this doesn't have to be exact, because there's going to be some changing of shape as we stitch into our patchwork panel. The more we stitch, the smaller the panel will be, so you don't have to be absolutely precise. We just want a bit of an idea of where the boundaries are, and if you want to, if you find it helpful, you can then join up those marks that you've made, just to give you much clearer indication of where the book will be. So I'm going to focus on the front of the book today, and I want to use some of the trims and my little embroidered panel. And I think a good starting point is to just play around. I want to hide some of those verticals and horizontals. So even though I'm going to be adding things vertically, there won't be that artificial line down the fabric. So I'm just going to iron this ribbon ever so slightly, because it was folded up and has got all those loopy sections in it. You have to be quite careful when ironing, move the iron quite quickly, particularly with satin ribbon, because it will melt and you don't want that. I think it would be nice to create a band across the front cover, and if I place the ribbon here, it's going to cover over that artificial line between the blocks of the patchwork, and it will actually sit, I know it looks quite far over, but it will actually sit about a third of the way in from the edge of the cover, which I think is a nice way to break up the space. Thirds work really nicely. I'm not going to tack it or stitch it. I'm just going to put a couple of pins in to hold it in place. I'm going to trim off the bottom of that ribbon. I think I've got about 1.5 meters of the ribbon, so it's quite cumbersome. Just going to trim that off. I've also got this dark green grosgrain ribbon. So the blue is a lighter satin. This is a much chunkier grosgrain ribbon, and the colour's a bit strong, I think. It does blend quite nicely, but it is a much darker tone than everything else in the fabric pack. So I wondered about toning that down a little bit by sliding it under that blue ribbon, and then maybe we could blend them together by adding something over the top. I quite like the effect of that crochet trim, the crochet lace. I like the fact that you can see the colours coming through, but I do think you really lose the ribbon if I put it like that, and I wonder if I've got a slightly different idea for using this crochet ribbon. We could offset it, I suppose, but I think I quite like the ribbon just as it is. I do quite like the idea of laying something over the top and maybe blending the join between the two. So let's try out this green braid. I really like this. I think it's quite dainty. And I wonder what would happen if I placed it over the join. Now that I really like. Bit springy. That I really like. I think that would look lovely to have that sort of decorative trim down the join. Now, I could spend hours agonising over where to put things, and I often do when I'm doing slow stitch, but I want to do this quite intuitively. So I think I'm going to go with that. That's the first thing that I've done that I think, yeah, I quite like that idea. So I'm just going to make sure my pins are going through all the layers, so both ribbons and the backing as well. Just going to pin that in place. I'm not going to pin the braid on at the minute because I'll add that shortly. And I'm going to stitch down the two ribbons. Let me just double check. I do really like it. I think it just softens that harsh line and adds a little bit of texture. This is all going to be about trying to balance texture and colour and line. And we're just going to play around with what's in the pack. So I wonder if we could maybe do something with the embroidery to break up that very strong vertical line. I quite like that it's circular, and I think it's going to be a nice motif. Now, what I was worried about, you can see it here with it sitting on the fabric, it's really transparent. The fabric was very light, and so I wanted to pad it a little bit. So I've got a little bit of an offcut of batting, just drawn around my same jam pot lid again, and cut out a circle of batting, and I'm just using some normal machine thread to tack that batting behind the embroidery, and that's going to give it a little bit of padding, a little bit of texture, which I think will be quite nice. But it also will make that embroidery opaque, so that very dark green ribbon in particular isn't going to show through really strongly through that quite flimsy fabric. I'm using a fairly neutral thread. It's the thread that I used to tack down all the patchwork pieces in the last episode. And I'm just going round on the line actually with a running stitch. When I'm all the way around, I'm just going to trim that fabric back to just outside my tacking stitches. Just be careful not to cut the stitches, but I don't want an overhang because I've got a bit of an idea about how I want to attach this to the front. You could do this almost like a Suffolk puff, where you do a turned edge. You can gather it in so that it folds back on itself. You could do, you could leave like a ½ centimetre border around the edge and do a turned edge applique, but I've got something different in mind. So that's my circular panel, and I think it will look really nice breaking up that vertical stripe. It's going to lend a different texture, and it's going to sort of suggest a shape to us for our embroidery. It also means I can save a little bit of this braid because I don't have to put braid all the way down. I don't need any braid running underneath that embroidery, so I can have a short piece at the bottom and then a longer piece coming out at the top. So something like this is a really nifty trick. If you don't have enough of the material that you want to use on your slow stitch panel, breaking it in half and putting something else across it is a way of making a little go a long way. I've got some of the dark green thread that came in the slow stitch pack that I bought, and I've got 2 strands threaded into my needle, and I'm just going to go along the ribbon using an applique stitch. Now this was quite tough. This grosgrain ribbon is not easy to stitch through, so that has told me that I want to not limit the amount that I use, but just limit the amount of stitching on it that I do. So I'm probably not going to embellish that green ribbon anymore. So I'm quite glad that I've put some of it underneath the blue, because I think it would be quite hard work if I wanted to embroider it, because it's quite a strong colour. If I embroidered on it, I'm going to make life a little bit difficult for myself. You can see I've put some thimble tape around my finger there because it was really starting to be painful. I'm just applique stitching the ribbon on, and I'll use some of the blue thread that came in the pack to stitch down the blue. Now the green blends in quite well. The blue stands out quite a lot. It's a stronger colour, but as long as our stitches are neat, I think we'll cope. So I've stitched the ribbon on now, and I've stitched the braid on. I've just used an applique stitch again to just catch the braid. It needs a bit of a press because some of the loops on the braid have got a little bit distorted, but I really like the way that that's looking, the way it's breaking up space on that front cover. And I've left that gap there. That's where my embroidery is going to go. Now you can do this in lots of ways. You could do it more over to the right, more over to the left. I've decided I want it centered across the ribbon rather than centered on the braid. So if I center it on the braid, it's going to be too far over to the left. So I just need to use that top and bottom leaf shape on the design to make sure it's positioned evenly across the ribbon. And I'm just going to put a couple of pins in to hold it steady while I stitch it on. Now I'm not going to do a different stitch to attach it. What I'm going to do is use the stitching that I'm using to attach this embroidery as part of the slow stitch design. So I've just come in maybe ½ centimetre in from the edge of my embroidered circle, and I'm going to go around in a running stitch. Now you might be able to see there I've put in some guidelines that radiate out, so I've just roughly marked in north, south, east and west, and then put some diagonal lines that cross what's roughly the centre. So the centre of this design is the spot just between those two rounded flowers at the centre. You can see there's a heart, two little flowers, two circular flowers, and then a star, and the top of that star is roughly the centre of the design. So that's what I've used as my guide to put in those guidelines. What I'm planning to do is stitch lots of concentric circles and then break across those with some lines that radiate out, and it's all going to be running stitch. So there's no fancy stitching today. It's a really simple running stitch. So this is inspired by Borrow, which is a Japanese kind of visible mending technique, very similar to Indian Kantha, where you piece together fabrics to patch holes and it extends the life of a garment. It dates back to the days where cloth was really expensive, and so there was no such thing as fast fashion. People would make do and mend quite literally. And I remember even in my childhood, my grandma darning socks and handkerchiefs and tea towels to just extend their life. And I think we've forgotten the value of fabric really in some respects. So I quite like that everything on this piece, apart from this embroidery I suppose, is vintage. It's pre-owned, it's pre-used. The batting is a little offcut from making a quilt. The embroidery was free with magazine, and so there's very little on here that is new. And so I think doing a borrow style stitch on it is in keeping with the theme. Now obviously I'm not making do and mending. I'm not trying to make this last, but I am trying to add some texture. I'm doing this in my way though, so I'm putting my own slant on this, and I'm taking inspiration from that circular motif to influence the way I stitch the whole book sleeve. So rather than working with the angles of the patches, I am going to work with some circles, I think. So I've stitched all the way around with a running stitch. I've still got thread in my needle, so I'm going to go back round. I happen to be working in the opposite direction, only just because of where my needle came up. I'm going to stitch back round another line of running stitches. So this is taking my stitching very close to the edge of that patch now, and that's going to help secure it to the background, and then hopefully that line of the white fabric is going to merge. Now these are the threads that I got in the pack. I've got this chartreuse green, which I think will work quite nicely to blend in some of the yellows that I've got across the panel, but I'm going to do concentric circles of those, and then I think I'm going to add some radiating lines of running stitch coming out like that. They won't be even. I'll try and randomise the colours a little bit, and I'm trying to stitch in just quite an intuitive way. So I'm going to cut a piece of thread, stitch until I run out, and then I might change colour or carry on. And this is what I ended up with. So I've got a few lines of the green, then I've got some blue, then I brought in some beige. And another thing that happened was that I noticed that the beige matched quite well with the backing fabric of this embroidery, and the more I stitched it, the puffier it became. So what I did was I went across that piece, that circular embroidery, with just some invisible basting stitches to hold it down to the surface. It was bagging out quite a lot because of the pressure on the fabric from the stitching around the outside. So that's just held it in place, and you wouldn't know. You honestly can't see the stitches at all. I've got some thread left in my needle from that process, and so I'm now going to start adding in my verticals, and I'm not trying to match them to anything. So I'm not trying to cross over the circular stitching in any particular way. They will land where they land. So this is just a line of running stitches, working out from what would be the centre, but obviously I haven't gone all the way into the centre. I've started from just inside the circular stitch lines. And because these fan out, they radiate out, I'm going to cut off my thread at the end of most of the lines, because I don't want huge sections of trailing thread running across the back, joining up the different lines that I'm stitching. So I've come round a little way and I'm going along another one of the lines, and you might be able to just see that this line of running stitch is actually landing in between most of the lines of running stitch from the circles. So some of them will cross over those circular stitch lines, some of them will sit in between stitches, and that doesn't bother me. I'm not trying to make it look any particular way. So just enjoy the process of stitching, and where the lines land is where they land. And like I've already said, I'm just going to stitch until I've run out of thread in my needle. I'm also not worrying about keeping all these lines the same length, so some of them will be longer and extend out quite far from the circle. I'm just going to keep going with this one a little bit. Some of them will be a bit shorter, I want it to feel quite improvised. So I've kind of run out of that beige thread now, and I'm going to put in some of the chartreuse just to see how it works. And I couldn't find the end here. Thought it would be a good opportunity to show you what to do with the skein. So what I'm trying to do is find the two loose ends. Now with anchor threads, you always pull from the end that's got the logo. With DMC, you always pull from the end that's got the number. But I don't know this brand. So what I'm trying to do is find the two ends, and what you're looking for is the one that comes from inside. So this short one here is sitting on the surface of the skein. This longer one is coming from the centre, and that's the one that you pull. You look for the end, the loose end of thread that is coming from within the skein, and if you pull that one, you won't get tangles. So even if you're using a skein that you aren't familiar with, there's always a way to use the skein without tangling it, and it is to pull from within rather than the one that's sitting on the surface. It's often the one that's longer when you find it. So let's see how this chartreuse works. So this again is 2 strands, and I'm just going to stitch a line of this. This will be a bit of a feature colour, so I'm not going to do tons of stitching in this chartreuse, but I think it will just add a little pop, and it sort of bridges the gap between the blues and greens of the colour scheme and that yellow that features every now and again as well. So it's that little bridge that joins those two up. It's not quite green and it's not quite yellow. And I actually really like it, and it turned out a lot more subtle than I thought it was going to. It didn't look as sort of acid and vibrant as I was expecting it to, but it does just add a little bit of something to add some interest to the design. So when you're thinking about your colour scheme, it's often really helpful to put in something that is very different, add a little bit of a feature colour that you can either pick out of one of your fabrics, or you can look for a colour that bridges the gap. You can see I've done 2 lines quite close together. I'm just going to dot those around the circle as a bit of a feature, and hopefully it's going to add a little bit of interest and movement. So I think I'm going to carry on stitching. I might put a couple of other circles like this to echo this design around the piece. So I think it might be nice to just bring harmony to the piece. Maybe put one up here. Let's get my jam pot lid, and I think let's add another circle up here. Maybe try and work in odd numbers. So let's find a spot for a third. I'm just sketching around that jam pot lid to give me a bit of a guide. And so I can do a concentric circle there, and then maybe one that overlaps the ribbon. I'm not going to stitch the ribbon. Maybe if we do it so that it wraps around the edge of the cover of the book. I've just gone off the screen a little bit here because I'm so close in. But if I put one that overlaps the ribbon and that line that's marking the edge of the cover, this one will overlap the cover and wrap around. And I'm not going to stitch over the ribbon, so this one will be interrupted by the ribbon. It will look like the ribbon is covering it over, and that will sort of harmonise the front cover with that inner flap as well. So I'm going to stitch those in, and then we'll see where we've got up to. So here's my design so far, and I have to say I am really loving this. I love that braid. I think it's lovely. I quite like that the space that that ribbon has created, because it's not got loads of stitching on it, and these they almost look like ship's wheels or compasses. I think I really like the way they're looking, with that pop of the bright green coming in every now and again. And it does blend in really well with that yellow, even though it's not the same colour. Now, between now and the next video, I also got this thread in my thread pack. This is just a vintage machine cotton. So I've got these centres of the circles that are quite puffy at the moment because there's no stitching in them. They've raised up because the stitching around them has compressed the fabric. They're rising up quite a lot. So I think I'm going to put some seed stitch in there. And I'm going to concentrate on the front cover of the book. And I think I'm also going to put in some more traditional borrow style stitching. I'm going to use that machine thread to add in some vertical and horizontal lines just to quilt down the fabrics together and add a little bit more stitch detail. I think there's some other places as well, like this bottom corner, where I think I could stand to have another circle or two. And I think I'm going to make this stitching go across the flap as well. I think that's going to work really well. Trapped something inside. So let's just put the book back in and get a little bit of a sense of what that front cover is starting to look like. It's not quite far enough over, so I'm going to just adjust it. I'm sorry about all my chaos. Let's move those things out of the way. They're just a distraction. Let's just shuffle the book a little bit over. That ribbon band is coming right down the centre, and that doesn't look quite right, just because I've not positioned the book properly. But I really like the way these motifs are wrapping around the cover. Just can't make it move. Let's there we go, that's a bit better. It's still not quite right, but it's closer. So the ribbon is off centre, which I really like, and those stitch lines I think are adding loads of dimension, and I love the fact that that circle is wrapping around onto that inner flap. I think it's adding lovely texture, and that the circular motifs are taking all that attention away from the angular patchwork. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I will put some more stitch inspiration over here, so check out these videos if you want to carry on and do some more slow stitch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back soon with part 3. Bye.